I tell you what, things may be settling down in Washington for the holidays, but out on the high seas of the Caribbean, the action is, like the weather, is getting hotter. There have been some dramatic developments in the past 24, 48 hours that have largely escaped mention in the mainstream media, much less been subject to any proper explanation about what they all mean. Now, last week, of course, when it came to Venezuela, the big question was about the attempt to stitch up Secretary of War Pete Hegseth over that supposed double-tap strike on what were said to be Venezuelan drug boats. Oddly, though, that whole controversy, which was supposed to be Hegseth's and possibly Trump's "the walls are closing in" moment, seems to have dropped out of the headlines. I wonder why. Could it be that, like pretty much everything else in the Democratic left playbook for literally the past decade, they managed to get themselves on the wrong side of the old 80-20 rule? You know, I'd love to have been in the meeting for this one. Can you just imagine? Gosh, guys, sorry, not guys, gender-neutral political associates, we seem to have taken a shellacking that time we took the side of biological men in women's change rooms, and the time we opposed deporting illegal migrants who'd committed terrible crimes. And, well, about that Hamas thing, the less said the better. But you know what will really rally America to drive Trump out of office? If we side with the cocaine smugglers working in concert with a nasty anti-American regime in Venezuela that's not only playing footsie with our enemies and rivals, but also selling them oil on the cheap. Yeah, love that Democrat logic. But on Thursday, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Navy, the FBI, and other assets ran an operation to seize a cargo ship that was absolutely loaded with oil, as much as 1.6 million barrels worth, and was being used to smuggle crude out of Venezuela in violation of sanctions. I gotta say, the pivot here is incredible. We have, in the space of a week, gone from a war on drugs to let's choke off the one real source of major funding for the Maduro regime in Venezuela and look to precipitate, finally, its collapse. All in a week. Now, Venezuela, by the way, is a great example of why socialism is a hell of a drug, going from one of the richest countries in South America 30 or 40 years ago to the sort of place where a special occasion calls for eating the zoo animals. And oil is what this all now seems to be coming down to. Choking off Venezuela's ability to pump out oil, sell it to the foes of the West, and thus keep its evil regime going. Well, I don't need to tell you what comes next. What has happened in the past several weeks is that the U.S. has quietly but actively building up a fleet in the southern Caribbean, not so much designed for fast movement and quick action to take out drug smuggling speedboats. No. That, I think, was a fake. But instead to undertake strategic blockades of oil shipments in violation of sanctions. Now, the ship that the Coast Guard seized was seized using a complicated series of measures. The ship was using a complicated series of measures to spoof its identity and location on radar, and it was owned by a complicated series of shell companies to hide its true nature and ownership, which of course goes back to the Venezuelan regime, and it's using it to bust sanctions and get cheap oil off to Iran and China and get the money in return. Now, so far, this has been treated as an isolated incident, but I think it must be seen as a sign of what's coming next. Remember, Trump flagged Venezuela as a target back in his 2024 campaign.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
And here's what Politico was told by Donald Trump in an interview earlier this week.
Talk about
so
strategy.
How far would you go to take Maduro out of office?
I don't want to say that, but...
But you want to see him out?
His days are numbered.
Indeed. Now, the administration has shown that it can intercept and disrupt shadow smuggling fleets and expose the networks that have kept Maduro afloat. This was just one ship, but really, if you look at it closely, it represents the entire model that Caracas has been depending on for years. If the Trump administration keeps up the pressure, it will fall over. Oil, even with sanctions, is the chief currency earner for the Venezuelan regime. They get a cut of the drug traffic, sure, but it is the oil that keeps their economy, what's left of it, moving. Speaking of oil, a reporter asked the president where all that black gold was going to wind up.
Well, we keep it, I guess. When you have to follow the tanker, you know, you're a good newsman, just follow the tanker.
Do you know where it was going? Was it going
follow
to
it,
China?
get a helicopter and follow the tanker.
Is it true it's going to
But we're
Cuba?
going to, I assume we're going to keep the oil.
Ah, yes, indeed. That, of course, led to this little fun someone out there on the internet had with AI. Look at that. But fun and games aside, it's also important to remember that this isn't some lark by the administration. Trump isn't just off on a folly here, though I am a little skeptical, and I know a lot of Trump supporters are as well, about him getting the U.S. into a new foreign entanglement. But the fact of the matter is, their dictator Maduro is a bad guy. Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who just escaped from Venezuela, has actually been awarded the Nobel Prize for her efforts. And after a harrowing escape mission, she just landed in Norway to accept that gong. Let's hear what she had to say about the regime.
Would you welcome a U.S. military intervention in Venezuela?
Look, some people talk about invasion in Venezuela, the threat of an invasion in Venezuela, and I answered, Venezuela has been already invaded. We have the Russian agents, we have the Iranian agents, we have terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, operating freely in accordance with the regime. We have the Colombian guerrilla, the drug cartels that have taken over 60% of our populations, and not only involved in drug trafficking, but in human trafficking, in networks of prostitution. So this has turned Venezuela into the criminal hub of the Americas. And what sustained the regime is a very powerful and funded, strongly funded repression system. Where does that funds come from? Well, from drug trafficking, from the black market of oil, from arms trafficking, for human trafficking. We need to cut those flows.
Yet despite this compelling testimony, many Democrats just don't get it. Have a look at Congressman Hank Johnson.
Yeah, we are the world's #1 bully, and we're using our immense, unrivaled power to rule over those who have less power. And we're doing it with impunity. And this sends a shocking message to the world that America is indeed what did they used to call the great hand of Satan or something like that?
Ah, yes, he said the quiet part loud. The Democrats think America is the great Satan. But tell you what, it is funny because it seems like only yesterday Trump was a bad guy because he wasn't tough enough on Russia. Now he's a bad guy, according to these people, because he's being too tough on one of Russia's client states and silent partners. Please, tell me how this works. Make it make sense. But if the seizure of that oil tanker was one warning, that this rant by Johnson is another, and look forward to massive congressional attacks on Trump's Venezuelan project, including, I predict, an impeachment attempt for not invoking the War Powers Act in an attempt to nobble his presidency next year before the midterms. You heard it here first. Anyway, if you're still not convinced Maduro, though, is a baddie who deserves taking out, well, this footage will shock you. Here is the Venezuelan dictator at a rally just 3 weeks ago. Yes, that's right. And I tell you what, that makes Guantanamo Bay look like the Four Seasons Hotel. He is singing Imagine, the singularly worst song and the faux commie anthem for generations of hippies. Add that to the way his oil is being used to fund nefarious criminal and terrorist activity around the world, and well, I think Trump's got a point.